Welcome back to Mantis University. Today's class is all about preparedness. What do you need to keep one mantis from hatchling to adulthood? What do you need to keep 100 mantises? The supplies that you stock up on will heavily depend on the number and species of mantises you have, among other factors too. But today I want to show you a variety of things that have been invaluable to me over more than 20 years as a keeper of one or two mantises at a time and as a medium-scale breeder of many species. Let's look at housing first. Today is not going to be a deep dive into housing. We'll spend more time on that later. But instead, we'll look at the size classes of containers that mantises should live in as they grow up. And next to me here is a group housing setup for a bunch of double-shield mantis hatchlings. This is a net butterfly cage called a pop-up because of the wire frame that can collapse or expand, and it's one of the best ways to house a lot of babies at once. The wood wool lets them spread out and provides more molting opportunities, and this enclosure is easy to feed by dumping fruit flies through the zippered door. Since this is a net cage, it's easy for the mantises to dry out, so you should mist it thoroughly 1 to 3 times a day, depending on how dry your house is. If you're keeping a small number of babies, or are having trouble maintaining the moisture level high enough in the net cages, tiny cups like this are perfect. This is a 9-ounce deli cup that I've modified with shelf liner to give it an easily grippable ceiling and wall. Good grip like this is an absolute necessity for successful molting in most mantises. I use these cups for the majority of my holdback babies for future breeding generations, and I have a ton of them stockpiled and waiting. This is honestly just a great thing to do while you're watching a movie, chilling out, talking to someone. Just glue shelf liner or mesh onto cups and prepare for the future. Deli cups do come in larger sizes too. Here's a 16 and 32-ounce option with similar mesh or shelf liner additions. You can cut away the top for added ventilation, making a variable sized window. And you can use many holes punched with a needle if you want it to stay more humid, like if you're keeping an ootheca to hatch in here. Smaller mantises can live in containers like these their whole lives if you want to. And they can be decorated more as well. These are just plain for demonstration. Another nice option for smaller mantises are little terraria, like this acrylic example. I haven't added any mesh to this one for 2 reasons. It's just used for adults, and it has branches and plants where the Peruvian dragon mantises are constantly perching. Notice the branches arcing over the top. This is a good practice for any mantis enclosure, and a tip that I'm going to give ahead of the enclosure design video. Incorporating curved sticks like this into the ceiling of mantis enclosure creates varied perching opportunities, and safe plants seem to be the healthiest surfaces for a mantis's feet. For larger mantises, you can use a wide variety of enclosures. I love huge net cages like this, especially for some of the biggest species, like the cat-eye mantis, Heterochaeta orientalis. These big net cages are even possible to pair, to keep multiple mantises in of communal species, and to modify with curved sticks all over the place really easily. You can also use glass terraria. This example, a display enclosure for one adult mantis, is one of my favorite ways to display a mantis in a habitat that looks somewhat similar to where it would live in the wild. If you're not sure what kind of enclosure your specific mantis species will do best in, feel free to ask us in the Mantis Meet Facebook group. Moving on from containers, I want to discuss feeding. Over a mantis's life, they're going to eat a lot of prey. Here is an example feeding chart based on the lifespan of the European mantis, Mantis religiosa. This chart assumes an average of 3 or 4 fruit flies are eaten per day, and 1 roach every 3 to 4 days, depending on the life stage. Now multiply that by however many mantises you want to keep. That's a lot of food. In reality, things are going to vary from this chart a ton, but it's just an example to say that before you get a mantis, You're also going to need a way to get a bunch of fruit flies and at least 40 roaches. The best way to have this kind of roach supply is to buy them. A group, small colony or two of the best feeder species. My favorites are these red runners, Paraplaneta lateralis, and dubia, Laptica dubia. The dubia are larger and really filling, while the red runners are extremely enticing for most mantises to catch and are great for smaller species. They live in here. Well, this and 5 more bins that I have in the other room. If you want to breed mantises at all, if you want to breed mantises at all but the smallest scales, you're going to want a roach colony. These are very easy to set up, and there are already a great number of online resources about the care of these animals. I think a more in-depth class on feeders is definitely something we'll need to make in the future, though. Now, you might be thinking, that's what my mantis eats, but what does its food eat? Well, Ron Swanson, if you were thinking that, your mind is in the right place. Roaches got to eat too, and a roach colony can be a phenomenal way to put food scraps to use. Leftover vegetable pieces, pizza crusts, apple cores, all these can go to your roaches. Some cheap, protein-packed fish food will also go a long way to helping your roaches reproduce better and be more nutritious for your mantis. They're housed, they're fed, but what else does your mantis need? Water is really key. Spray bottles like this, or if you've got a larger operation, something like this, filled with water rather than maybe pesticide or herbicide, are ways to easily give water to both tiny cups and net cages in a way that isn't going to harm or startle the mantis or totally drench the enclosure. An optimal temperature range is another extremely important part of mantis care. Now, everyone's living situation is different, and some people have no difficulty providing the ambient 75 to 85 degrees Fahrenheit that the vast majority of pet mantises will thrive in. But if your place can run a little cold, heating options like lights and ceramic heat emitters are available to help. I prefer overhead heating to heat mats or heat tape. When you're setting up that heating, though, keep in mind that overheating will kill a mantis quickly if it can't escape those dangerous temperatures. Set up your heating system and your enclosure first, without the mantis, and run it throughout the day, testing the temperatures throughout the enclosure. Make sure that the heating element isn't going to melt or burn the container. And finally, keep in mind that heating sources like lamps and ceramic heat emitters can dry out an enclosure, and especially a mantis's delicate little feet, if it's hanging underneath them all the time. You can reduce this danger by increasing misting, putting the heat source around a foot or so away from the container, and giving the mantis things to perch on that shade it from constant direct heat exposure. Before we go, I want to show you some other tools that have been extremely valuable to me. First is my favorite mantis accessory ever, reverse grip tweezers. These are closed by default. You squeeze them to open, and they save you so much finger exertion when you're tongue feeding a bunch of mantises. They're so narrow that you can feed a fruit fly to a hatchling off of these without scaring it or obstructing its grip, like larger tongs and flat-ended tweezers will tend to do. And if your mantis mismolts and you need to get shed off of its legs, there's nothing better for mantis medical care than tweezers like that. This magnifier is called a jeweler's loop, and it's exceptional for sexing younger nymphs or getting a close look at the details of your mantis. A paintbrush is good for picking up tiny insects, for feeding your mantis liquid food or dabbing water to its mouth, and especially for distracting an angry female mantis while you're trying to free a male from her claws. And finally, I use hot glue all the time in my animal room. This is how I modified the net enclosures that you've seen. This is how you fasten sticks or mesh to walls and ceilings in a really quick time period. It patches up holes, and it's actually my favorite material for attaching utheki to incubation containers. but you do have to let it sit for a while to cool off before you touch the ooth to it at all. Thank you once again for coming to Mantis University. Please share with us some of your favorite Mantis supplies and tools in the comments, and we hope to see you again soon.